So today we have a bit of a news roundup, including some confusion over the retirement status of Nobuo Uematsu, some updated sales figures for the Final Fantasy franchise, and the Clair Obscure Expedition 33 game just revealed a pretty star-studded cast, and I'm kinda shocked to see who is in it. So if any of that sounds cool to you, or if you just like what you hear and you want to stick around, you can click the like button and leave a comment down below on any of the topics we discussed in today's video, and you can subscribe if you want to come back. So starting off first with that confusion over Uematsu-san's status within the industry. Now this comes to us from the Fantasian Neo Dimension Twitter account, where they put out a video of Uematsu-san promoting the game, which is going to be coming out in December. And in the video he mentions that this is going to be his last video game project, which got people kind of scared and up in arms, like, wait, he's retiring already? Like, he's done making music? And it turns out that is not the case. So there may have been some translation errors in what Uematsu said with the subtitles, but he took to his Twitter account to kind of calm people down and clear up any confusion by saying, wait, everybody calm down. There seems to be some misunderstanding, but I'm not retiring from video game music work. I'm going to cut back a bit on my video game music work because I want to have more time to make the music I want to make. It would be difficult for me to take on the entire soundtrack of a video game because the time commitment for composing would be too long, but I would like to continue to work on jobs such as one theme song, which is what he's been doing for the past few years. And this was actually clarified a while back. On the Square Enix channel, they had this really cool roundtable featuring Uematsu-san as well as Tetsuya Nomura, where they were talking about Final Fantasy VII as a whole. And in that video, he pretty much mentioned that he's not going to compose an entire soundtrack, so to speak, for one video game. He's just going to come back, do a song here and there, and just kind of contribute in that way. You know, he did the theme song of Follow for Final Fantasy VII Remake, he did No Promises to Keep for Rebirth, and we have yet to see what song he's going to use as the main theme for 7 Remake Part 3. But it's just kind of funny that he had to come out and clear up any confusion, letting people know that he's not retiring. But you know, I see where he's coming from. Composing an entire soundtrack for a video game is not easy. It's so much work, whether you're composing a main theme or a character theme, battle themes, different themes for the areas. It's a ton of work to put into it, which, you know, kind of reminds me of Masayoshi Soken when he was simultaneously doing the soundtrack for Final Fantasy 16 as well as 14 while also battling cancer. And that is not easy. You can spread yourself very thin, and Uematsu-san is on the older side, so for him to just be like, you know what, I just kind of want to take this time to do what I want to do, but I'm still going to come back and drop a banger on you guys every now and then, I think is great. And just kind of reflecting on the body of work that he's contributed to video games, specifically with Final Fantasy. Again, I think this dude is a genius composer who manages to distill a Final Fantasy game's identity into its soundtrack. It just perfectly reflects the world that it comes from. But it'll be cool to see what kind of other projects he takes on. You know, he used to have the rock group, the Black Mages. Unfortunately, they disbanded, but they put out a bunch of really awesome rock covers of iconic Final Fantasy songs. I know that he has another side project in band called the Earthbound Papas. I don't know, maybe they're gonna put out a record. Maybe he's gonna choose to compose music for film and television. Nobody really knows, but anyone who is able to land Uematsu-san on their project is incredibly lucky because of what that man can produce. It's just on a completely different level. And the day that he actually does choose to retire will be very sad, but he can reflect knowing that he has an incredible body of work that we all cherish so much. So moving into sales figure updates for the Final Fantasy franchise, this comes to us directly from Square Enix in their About section for their press briefings. You know, studios usually have a little blurb about themselves and their most popular games, and it turns out that the Final Fantasy franchise has sold 10 million more units since September of 2023. So if we look at this press briefing very quickly, it says the Square Enix group of companies boasts a valuable portfolio of intellectual property, including Final Fantasy, which has sold over 195 million units worldwide. They also go on to talk about Dragon Quest and, of course, the massive space hit Space Invaders. Now, this is cool because the last time Square Enix did this was in September of 2023, and at that time, Final Fantasy franchise had sold 185 million units. So in the span of a year, they've sold 10 million more units of the entire Final Fantasy franchise. And doing some rough estimates, we can guess that half of that is from 16 and Rebirth, since You know, again, we toss these numbers out there all the time, but 16 did 3 million units in its first week on PS5. Rebirth supposedly did around 2 million in its first month, so that's half of that 10 million right there. That other 5 million can include a myriad of titles across the board for Final Fantasy, including more copies of 16 on console or PC, more copies of Rebirth, copies of 7 Remake. There's also the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, which came out recently as well on PlayStation, Switch, PC, and I believe the Xbox version was also recently released too. And then of course I recently purchased Final Fantasy X and 10-2 Remastered to play on my PS5, so we've all contributed to that number in some way. And I know Square Enix has been making a pretty big stink about these games not meeting their sales requirements and their expectations, but to see the entire franchise of Final Fantasy be close to 200 million units sold across the board is still very impressive, and the fact that they were able to pump out 10 million more units of the entire franchise over the course of a year is super sick. So hopefully there will be an Xbox version of Final Fantasy 16 around the corner that can maybe add to that number. Maybe the PS5 Pro could sell some copies of 7 Rebirth, since it does look visually much better on that console. And then of course there's the long-awaited PC version of Rebirth, which I think is going to take much longer to hit now. Initially I was thinking maybe at the Game Awards they could tease that, but with the PS5 Pro version being a thing, I think Sony's going to want to take full advantage of having that exclusivity. They're going to want people to buy more copies of Rebirth and a PS5 Pro and play it there. So I think that Pro version, as good as it looks, unfortunately has probably delayed the PC release of Rebirth, so we might not be getting that until maybe summer of next year. And speaking of sales, I gotta throw this one in there real quick because I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, but this comes to us from the Capcom Dev1 Twitter account, where they have announced that today Resident Evil 4 has officially sold 8 million plus units. And again, this game came out in March of 2023 on a multitude of platforms, so for it to finally hit 8 million units after a year plus is super sick. I can't wait to see what Capcom has in store for future Resident Evil games. There's been so many rumors just kind of flying around about Resident Evil 9 being the next big thing that could potentially get announced soon. And as far as the remake front goes for RE, it kind of looks like they're teasing an RE5 remake, which some people think, you know, probably doesn't need a remake, but based on how good RE4 was, I would love to see every upgrade they gave that game to an upgrade for Resident Evil 5. And it also kind of feels like Capcom is not necessarily changing the story of Resident Evil, but this new remake timeline is kind of like a soft reboot for the franchise, where they can kind of tweak some of the story stuff, some of the characters, and maybe how things play out, which could inevitably maybe lead to a remake of RE6 that is much better in terms of its story and its overall presentation and its placement within the timeline of the Resident Evil franchise. There's a lot that you could really clean up there. Now, getting to Clair Obscure Expedition 33, we've covered this game a few times here on the channel. It's a brand new RPG from a French studio, and they're looking to kind of put turn-based back on the map while also making some alterations to combat, adding some more real-time elements like dodging, doing parries, but it's still at its core going to be a turn-based RPG, and it looks pretty heavily inspired by like an Atlas game like Persona, and more recently Metaphor, and they're looking to kind of keep that alive. This is coming to us from the PlayStation blog, and we start off with the main character of Gustav, who looks so much like Robert Pattinson. I have to keep bringing that up because every time I see him, I just see R-Pat's face. It's a little weird. I'm sure I'll get used to it. But when I heard some of the voice acting in the previous videos that came out for that game, which we covered here on the channel, the voice of Gustav sounded so familiar to me, and I could not for the life of me place who was voicing him. And it turns out Gustav is going to be voiced by none other than Charlie Cox, who some of you may know as Daredevil from the Daredevil Netflix series. And this has me so excited because not only does Charlie seem like a genuinely good dude and very kind, but he is a phenomenal performer. His performance as Matt Murdock and Daredevil in that show is just stupendously good. He brought so much to that character that I didn't know much about Daredevil beforehand, but I became such a big fan of his interpretation of that character. So to hear him as the lead in this game as Gustav is sick. I can't wait to hear what he does with Gustav and how far he can push himself as an actor, but I think whatever he does, he's going to absolutely nail it. Voicing Mael is going to be Jennifer English, who PlayStation blog lists as a voice for Baldur's Gate 3. I have not played Baldur's Gate 3. I know it's incredible. It took the world by storm, and I'm positive Jennifer English is probably a fantastic actor because everyone who was in Baldur's Gate 3 was was a fantastic actor, so I'm excited to hear what she does as well. Kirsty Ryder, who is from Sandman, is going to voice Loon. I believe it's Shayla or Shala Nix who's going to be voicing Ciel. Again, these are French names, I may be butchering these. Apparently they are from the Old Guard. And then coming up to some even bigger names, we have Clive himself from Final Fantasy XVI, the Ben Starr, that is right, baby girl himself. Ben Starr is going to be voicing the character of Verso, or Verso. I don't know how you would pronounce it in French. And based on the trailer, he seemed like a very shady character. I thought he was going to be one of the villains because he is speaking to another character, which we will get to, who is potentially another villain. But Ben goes on to describe the character of Verso by saying, Verso is lost, lonely, and dangerous, and that he expects players to feel every emotion imaginable as they get to know this character. And Verso is essentially tracking the expedition with Gustav and Loon and these characters, so he's tailing them throughout this game. For what purpose, we don't know, but we do hear some dialogue towards the end of the trailer where Verso is speaking to another character, and this is a massive grab for this game. This is the character of Renoir, or Renoir, depending on how you French it up, and he is going to be voiced by none other than Andy frickin' Serkis, who he's everywhere. We all knew him as Gollum from Lord of the Rings. He was also in Black Panther. He's done a number of different movies, whether it's mocap or voiceover or live action, with him actually being on camera, and he is voicing Renoir, who based on the trailer kind of seems like he might be the main villain other than the Paintress, and the Paintress is the one who is reshaping this entire world. The PlayStation blog describes Renoir as a man relentlessly driven to save his family. He knows that victory demands sacrifice, and he's ready to pay the price. So it looks like maybe him and Verso are working together. Maybe he tasks Verso with tracking this group, finding out as much information as he can. Maybe Verso's got his own ulterior motives, we don't really know, but he seems like a pretty shady character, and getting Andy Serkis to be the voice is pretty massive. And with this trailer, they show off more combat, which looks so much more fluid. This is clearly footage from a newer, more recent build of the game. The stuff we saw previously was definitely much earlier on and a little bit rough, but everything seems to look more visually impressive, from the graphics to the frame rate to the animations, all of the different locations. There's even like some Ghost of Tsushima type stuff going on with this like foresty leaf area. There's like this cavern that the characters are traversing, and this is just super cool, man, to see just like a resurgence of RPGs just kind of taking the forefront. You had, you know, FF7 Rebirth at the beginning of the year. You've got most recently Metaphor, which is doing astronomically well. I think it sold like 1 million units in its first day of release. People are loving it. It's got like a 92 or 91, I think, on Metacritic. You've got the French kind of putting their spin on RPGs with Clair Obscure now. There's the Yakuza franchise, which has been nailing, you know, RPG mechanics and turn-based stuff for a while now as well. So it's just cool to see like this genre of gaming is still alive. It's still well. Of course, there's Baldur's Gate 3. How did I forget Baldur's Gate 3? One of the biggest RPGs in the past like 10 years to ever come out. So it's just nice to see this genre kind of flourishing, and there's different takes, whether it's JRPG with their kind of influences and, you know, stylistic choices with characters and combat. There's, you know, the Atlas stuff with what they're doing with Persona and Metaphor, and I'm just repeating myself now and going on a tangent, but it's just super cool to know that this genre is alive and well, and there's so much to look forward to. So with that being said, that is the video. I'm Curious Corduroy. Again, let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on what we discussed in today's video, whether it's the cast of Clair Obscure, the sales updates for the Final Fantasy franchise, or your thoughts on Uematsu-san's body of work and what he could be doing as he takes a step back from video game soundtracks. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.